Welcome to Farm Your Daily, a field forward podcast. I'm your host, David Geiger. Today on Farm Your Daily, first aid on the farm. We talk about how to help your families and neighbors in an emergency with Dr. Cari Croghan. Then John King of the Ground Level Dispatch has the latest update on global input prices and how they're affecting folks here. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, keeping folks informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Here Daily. And joining us on Farm Your Daily, we're going to take a look at first aid on the farm. And to do so, we have with us Dr. Cari Croghan. This Wellness Wednesday, we've had you on a few times. Very glad to have you on again. You are the medical consultant with Landis. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Cari. And what do we got to say about first aid on the farm? What are some best practices? Because I know there are, unfortunately, a lot of instances where farmers are headed off to the emergency room for just dealing with equipment or having some machinery issues, and sometimes it's just age. So what are some of the best practices you have that you've experienced that you recommend for folks?
Yeah, I mean, after 26 years of being in the emergency department, surrounded by rural areas, we get to see a lot of farming incidents where I live and where I trained. So we love acronyms in medicine because there's too much to know. So we like to put some letters in there, and thankfully, first aid is ABCs. So,
You're among good company. Agriculture loves its acronyms as well.
oh, right on. Good. That's the way it should be. I mean, simplify, please. So, basically, what we're looking for in the emergency department is the same thing that you can do when you're out in the field. And so, the first thing is airway and breathing. So, A and B, you can actually test by just asking them to speak, because that means that their airway is open and you don't have to do anything about that. And they have to take a breath to actually speak. So, now you've crossed off A and B. And I think one of the major things for farming incidents specifically is C, circulation. So lots of bleeding. Okay. So when you cut yourself, you have a big gaping wound, something is hemorrhaging, stuff like that. That's circulation. So we're talking about blood. Um, and so that's usually what it's going to be unless somebody's passed out, which is way past first aid. We're not going to get into that today. So circulation is where it's at. So you want to make sure that blood is flowing, but not on the outside of the body, hopefully. And if it is on the outside of the body, that's the first thing that you need to tend to. And people like to grab shirts or cloths or like blankets and things like that and just kind of smush this big thing on there because they don't really want to touch the blood and it's gross and icky and nobody wants to see it, which I totally understand, but that's not all that helpful because all you're doing is using that as a sponge to sop up the blood without actually stopping bleeding. So bleeding comes from vessels, right? They're inside little tubes. It's not like we have blood kind of pooled inside of us. That's a bad thing, actually. Um, and so you want to go after the vessel that is causing the problem. And the vessels are tiny. And so putting a big, huge blanket or pillow or something over a little tiny vessel is not helpful. You want to we call it direct pressure. So that could be the D, A, B, C, D. So basically, what you want to do is take a fingertip and stick it wherever the bleeding is. Is that gross and icky and you're going to touch the blood and all that stuff? Yes. But I mean, if it's bleeding significantly, that's what you need to do is put your finger on it. And so even something as tiny as a nosebleed, which can be super gross and disgusting and like you might be swallowing it or it's like spurting out or whatever, finger, right? So you want to actually put your finger on where it's bleeding from. And so just like doing this or putting tissue on the outside or even shoving toilet paper up your nose is not helpful. You need to actually put pressure on it. And so you can do it with a finger, you can pinch. Um, in the ER, if you come in with a nosebleed that won't stop, we actually basically use a padded clothespin. That's and That's all you're doing is
Well,
putting pressure
that's kind
on
of what
it.
I do when I get a nosebleed. I'll stick like a piece of tissue up there, which you said don't just do, but then I'll pinch my nose really hard with the tissue in there.
And you can. The only thing about the tissue that I would warn you about is that just like if you scrape your knee and you put pressure on it, um, if you like scrape the scab off or you put something dry on there and then remove it, you're taking the scab off there. And the same thing happens in the nose. So if you shove something in there, and I mean, I think it's great that you put something in there and then put pressure on it. It's the pressure that's actually going to stop it. But then when you take the tissue out, you just ripped the scab off. And so you risk bleeding again. Um, it might be kind of gross, but you could actually do that. Put the tissue up there, put pressure on it, and then just leave it for a while because if it gets really soaked with blood, you're not going to rip the scab off. Kind of
That is kind of
that's the
what
way.
I've ultimately found myself doing.
Mhm.
On the rare occasion that happens, I don't often get nosebleeds, but it's good to relate it to this situation because, as you said, ABCs, you have breathing, circulation, direct pressure. What was the A again?
Airway. So, open airway.
Airway.
If you can talk,
Okay.
then your airway's open,
Okay. So
essentially.
talking, airways open, breathing under control, circulation, where's the blood, and direct
Mhm.
pressure. Make sure you are holding a specific spot, even if it is a little yucky. So is one finger that because that's different from what I've heard of, like essentially going up to someone and taking a piece of cloth and then using like both hands to really push hard on the spot that's bleeding to kind of stymie it. But it would be better to like stick your finger in an open wound to close it up.
If you're okay, how big is the one that we're talking about,
Right.
right?
There's a lot of nuance to that.
That's a lot of nuance. Like, if you can cover it with your finger or 2, that is preferred over, like, a big blanket that's not putting any pressure on anything, it's just soaking it up. If you have a big gaping wound, then yeah, you might have to use, like, the pads of your hands to push on there, but again, you're not soaking stuff up with material, you're actually putting pressure on there, so the direct pressure is the key here. Um, the other thing I would say is that E is emergency. And so if somebody is hemorrhaging, you want to definitely put somebody in charge of, or you are in charge of calling 911 before you do anything. Because once you put pressure on that, you're going to need to stay there until somebody else takes over for you. Right. And so you don't want to like put pressure on there, start the clotting process, like you're going to make a little scab, and then go, oh, I got to call 911 because now you have all this back pressure of blood flow that's going to be like, right? So do the first things first: airway, breathing, circulation, figure out what's bleeding. Like if you have to, cut clothes off or whatever to figure out what's happening, make sure that you're calling 911 in the interim, and then get your hands on it, get your fingers in it, get your gloves are fun, but I mean, hardly any of us, including myself, are walking around with gloves. And just know that exposing your skin, your closed skin to other people's blood is not going to give you anything contagious. Okay. If you have a big wound and then you put your big wound on their big wound, then there can be some blood mixing. But yeah, people get kind of freaked out when they get, covered in blood or there's like a splash on their skin or something like that. You can't get HIV, hepatitis, anything like that from those instances. And so if you're going to save that person's life and limb, it's it's a commitment. But
Right.
yeah, I'm assuming you probably know that person too, which is
You're
a good
right.
thing.
Yeah, I would
Instead of just
imagine so.
random people on the street like myself.
So you have
So,
experience, Dr. Carey, as someone who's been in the emergency room, which is where probably a lot of accidents on the farm will end up going first. What is a situation where someone did everything right? And what is a situation where maybe things could have been done, but just weren't that you've experienced?
yeah, I think the best case scenario is when somebody is able to like get in there with a finger or fingertips or the pads of their hands and stop that bleeding or at least slow it down until we're able to take over, or 911 gets there and puts a tourniquet on there. You can also try and do a tourniquet in the field. Like if you know no one's going to be there for like 15, 20, 30 minutes and something really, really catastrophic is happening, use your belt. You can use like, a ripped up shirt and, try and tie that off, and you're going between the heart and the wound. So if it's on the leg, you want the tourniquet between the wound and the heart because that's what you're trying to stop, right? Is all of that blood flow. Um, and so things that are done right are you call 911 at an appropriate time to get EMS moving your way, and then you tried to do everything you could to stop that hemorrhage and that circulation. And so people will come in with like crazy funky tourniquets on, and we're like, right on, very creative. But it worked. Like you got the person and
Right.
their limb to us, and like now we can figure it out and we can get it all cleaned up and get down in there and see the blood vessel and clamp that off or take it to the OR or whatever needs to happen. Um, so those are the times where like, yeah, right on, good for you. Um, I will tell you a horror story of a guy who farmer in this area who the hay baler like sliced his belly
Oh no.
and his guts fell out into the clippings, and he was wearing overalls, and so he just shoved everything back in there and kind of moved his overalls to the side and finished his job and drove himself to the emergency department. Like none of that
What?
none of that should have happened. Like I understand that accidents happen and that happened to him, but like stop. You're done for the day, sir. Like that is 911 right now, right now. Um, and so that was sort of like everything went wrong. Something bad happened to him, and then he proceeded to make it worse. Um, Please do not,
Wow.
if you can, like, don't drive yourself to the emergency department when there's a really good chance you're going to pass out and wreck your car, because then now you've added a trauma on top of whatever just happened to you. We don't like
I,
that.
I've heard it as a common joke or meme among the medical community of the time to be the most scared is when a farmer willingly walks in to the hospital.
Yeah, this dude checked himself in and just said he had abdominal pain. And that's it. Like, he didn't say, "My guts are on the outside of my body." He did not say that, and so they were like, "Okay," and sat him in the waiting room until he started vomiting and, like, almost passing out. Then they brought him back, and as we're, like, taking his clothes off, we're like, "Oh my god, what in the heck is going on in there?" No,
Wow.
yeah, you're absolutely correct, like, farmers and horse people, like, when they voluntarily come in, you're like, "Mm, there's something serious happening over here because y'all do not come in for hangnails and paper cuts. That's not happening."
On the topic of first aid, staying safe on the farm. If there's an
Mhm.
accident nearby, you have the ABCs of what to do first and foremost, what to prioritize in terms of airways, breathing, circulation, direct pressure, and then emergency room. Call that emergency number, or get someone else to call it for you. What is I guess, a good conclusion, a good way to look up and be well informed to help yourself and your family members on the farm to make sure that if the worst thing comes to pass, an accident or something else, that they are prepared to be able to uh, support or help?
I think in the area of cell phones, the era of cell phones, like that's going to be your best friend to get somebody who knows what they're doing on the way. Especially if you're in rural and remote areas, for sure. You want to activate that sooner rather than later. You can always call them off, but you can't get them going faster. And then also make sure that you know where your first aid kit is so that if something happens, you're not spending 15 minutes going, "Well, Dolores had it over here and then Eric moved it." And, it's like that kind of craziness. So know where your emergency equipment is, your first aid equipment, your AED, um, who's got the phone, and delegate for sure. Like, don't try and do this on your own, because somebody's going to be freaking out. Somebody else needs to be calm, and probably neither of those people are the patient. So, might take three of you to get it done.
Right. Uh, as a final note, I should have covered this a little bit earlier, but I feel like another one to just be aware of, even for someone like myself, my own family members, be something like if there is a just failure of some kind, like heart failure or a stroke
Mm.
or any of those types of things. What are the? Do you still follow those same ABC, A through E situation?
Essentially, like, sometimes the acronym will change a little bit. The E for us in the emergency department is exposure. So, as you know, we get everybody naked. These are scissors. We get everybody naked. It might change a little bit just based on the emergency, but it's the same. I mean, if you don't have an airway open and somebody's not breathing, it does not matter what is happening. And that's actually one of the things that happens in traumas a lot, because you'll see, the leg has an extra ankle, or somebody's, arm looks crazy, and that's what you're focused on, or something's bleeding, and that's what you're focused on because it's so gruesome. But if they don't have an open airway and they're not breathing, nobody cares about their extra knee, right? I mean, you kind of want to take care of circulation early on if they're really hemorrhaging, because they're not going to be breathing long if they hemorrhage out. But if you don't have an open airway, you can't do anything after that. And even in the emergency department, like, when they roll into the trauma bay, or they roll into, the cardiac room, the first thing you do is make sure that they can say something to you. And so anywhere you go, that's first thing. You're just like, "Hey, Mike, what's up?" "I don't know." "Well, there's A and B. Mike is aware, his airway's open, he's breathing. Now work on something else."
Right. Being allowed access to oxygen is a bigger priority than losing the oxygenated blood, at least for a short period of time. So that priority is very good to know, very good to be informed on. As part of the medical consultancy over there at Landis, do you guys have some information or some ways to follow up or find out more on best practices when it comes to keeping safe on the farm you'd like to talk about for this Wellness Wednesday before we wrap up?
Oh my goodness, the office there is full of all sorts of good resources. And then the care team, we've got all sorts of people there. I think there's three physicians, a physical therapist, dietitian. Like, you guys have fantastic resources for everything that you need, whether it's an emergency or not. And Everybody who's part of the Landis family can have free advice and resources from me too. So I'm Dr. Carey, FFS. You can reach out to me directly or through Doug, and we can talk about any concerns that you have. And if I can't figure it out, I sure as heck know who can.
Dr. Cari Croghan is the medical consultant with Landis. Thank you so much for talking first aid on the farm with us today for Farm Here Daily.
Absolutely my pleasure, David. Thank you.
This is Farm Here Daily. We will have more conversations on the way, but first, a quick look at the marketplace. And there was some green on the board at the close for Wednesday. December corn 3.25 cents up, 4.23, with March rising 2 cents at 4.35 3/4. Soybeans in November 4 cents higher at 10.34 3/4. January a penny and a half up at 10.50. A quick look at the livestock market close for Wednesday. December live cattle down $5.60 a hundredweight, 239.82, with February falling $5.90 at 240.37. Feeder cattle in November, $9.25 a hundredweight down at 364.22. January, $9.25 weaker, 361.02. Lean hogs in December, 87 cents a hundredweight down at $82.40, with February 52 cents weaker at $85.22 a hundredweight. That is the Wednesday market close. This is Farm Here Daily. And joining us on Farm Your Daily, we are going to take a look at some of the input costs across the marketplace. To do so, we have John King with the Ground Level Dispatch. John, good to have you back on the program. And we do have some input challenges right now. It's very expensive at the moment for our corn and soybean farmers. What are the, or rather, what is the state of the input marketplace right now? And just give us a general update on that.
I'd still say the state is somewhat ho-hum. There hasn't been a whole lot changed since the summer. The maybe I would say a little bit of changes. You've seen some back off in urea and phosphate prices. However, that really hasn't materialized at the farm gate yet. I think the biggest thing remains is, we're still a huge premium to the rest of the world on phosphates, primarily due to the anti-dumping tariffs and the reciprocal tariffs that are taking place right now. It's really put us kind of in a position where people can't afford to bring us phosphates. So then we're reliant on domestic manufacturing, which we don't have enough. So you have to bring something here. So there's a lot of issues there. It's all political. At some point it will get cleaned up. We'll probably see some, I'm going to call it trading tendencies kind of ease up and go that route. But, until then, it's the phosphate market's going to remain broken. Globally, when we look at the nitrogen prices, in the past, the Chinese haven't really been much of a player in the export market. Really, I'm going to call it the last 24 months. And what we've seen coming out of them the last, I'd call it 2-3 months, is they've been pretty active participants in the export market. Not sure if it has anything to do, what it really has to do with, but they continue to be participants in Indian tenders when India looks to bring in urea. They're in other places in the world. So, that is opening and freeing up some supply that has pushed our price down here domestically, and, put urea in a spot where it's pretty competitive relative to the other forms of nitrogen. So we'll see what takes place there. Really when you're looking at it today, ammonia really is still your best buy. When we look to spring, UAN is really overpriced still. So it's hard to tell where that's all going to really shake out. Obviously the farm economy is not great. So the amount of guys that are really going to want to depart with cash here at the end of the year to lock in input prices are not going to be, there's lack of upside in the market to justify doing it. When I look out 6 to 7 months from now, we're probably softer phosphate prices. We probably got softer, as long as we don't like tariff the crap out of Russia and Russian imports. We probably got softer potash prices. There's opportunity for softer UAN prices, ammonia, all these things. When you really look at it with where the farm economy is at, we're probably trending toward lower prices. And in a lot of instances, it takes time for this stuff to reach the market, right? It's no different than any other market. When you have a pretty drastic change in commodity prices, fertilizer and other products tend to trade a little slower on and hitting that curve. And it's no different when prices rally. It's the same situation where, corn price might rally straight up and fertilizer kind of ticks along with it as it goes higher. So, I think that's the biggest thing if I'm a farmer. I'm not over applying anything this fall. Cash is tight. It's going to be tight. Yields weren't as good as what we thought. Maybe for the exception of bean yields. So, I think I'd just be smart about what I'm doing, my input decisions. A lot of people that I talk to are looking at, how do I, skip on dry phosphates, but I do have a starter system and maybe I'll do starter this year, or I can ban product out of my planter and maybe I'll do 1034-0 and no dry phosphates. So there's a lot of ways you can get creative to feed the crop that we're going to plant this spring. But, I think that's the opportunity with, whether you're reading Ground Level Dispatch or you're reaching out to us, we're constantly trying to help people understand what their alternatives are on the farm to either save money or, maybe spend the same amount of money more cost effectively.
You were just speaking about some of the challenges we have with some of the input costs and how there's a lot of just international and sometimes political issues going on with it. I recall another one being some of the war issues that were happening, some of the concerns there, specifically around Iran. Have any of those trading barriers eased up since maybe some de-escalation of tensions over there, or is that still a issue influencing prices right now?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely stabilized for sure. You've got natural gas supply really heading back to the places it needs to be. There's really not a significant ongoing conflict like there was there, back, a couple months ago. So yeah, I would say in general that's definitely helped things when we look at the ease in the market of, especially on the urea side. Um, really the conflict in Ukraine and Russia has been going on for so long. The market's figured out a way to kind of survive without it, in a lot of instances of what they were supplying. So, yeah, I mean, I would say in general, like it's always a thing, right? It's always going to be a thing as we continue to see any kind of flare up in tensions in the Middle East or anything that happens out of Russia, China, any of those places. It's always a thing that the market's going to add risk premium. I would say in general today, as we sit here on October 22nd, it's not as big of a thing that's really forcing the market into places where we don't want it to be. I think if we can continue to kind of keep that out of the market, I think that's what's going to also lend to some lower prices as we see on the horizon.
An aspect of input prices is very rarely are farmers in the US purchasing inputs for the moment. They're normally purchasing ahead of time, a year, sometimes two in advance. How do you use that potentially to your advantage? Do you risk potentially buying a little bit now and hoping for better prices later? Or is it something where you kind of got to bite the bullet and decide on how much inputs you're just planning for?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is it really comes down to strategy too with corn sales, right? Like corn or soybean sales. Like, listen, every year, what you're going to put on there from a cost per acre, it's not like it. I'm not going to say it's static, but you kind of know you're going to spend money. Like you're going to spend $50+ an acre on dry fertilizer most years. So, it's just understanding like I have that cost. I know I'm going to have it every year. And then it looks down to affordability of saying like, hey, I know I need to sell. I like corn at today's price. I'm going to sell 20 bushel or $20 the acre, just knowing I've got costs out there that are going to sometime accumulate. So I know people don't really look at it that way, but I just think back to 22, 23, when we were looking a year out on futures prices at $5+ and a lot of the people I worked with, I always told them, I said, hey, you're going to have $100 of fertilizer price cost between ammonia and dry on corn. So at 5.15 today, relatively speaking, the spread and overall affordability index would say historically that's good. That's good money to have. So, like those are things that I always used to kind of coach on. And try to look at it. And there's plenty of ways we kind of look at the overall affordability index relative to what the futures market's showing us. It's still trying to drive people to a point of action relative to what the averages look like over historically. There's been a lot of times in the past too, where I would say in general, the affordability looks great, but corn price still kind of stunk to sell at. Because input prices were so low. So you got to take it all into account. And, it takes, that's what we try to do here at MICLIG is really help people dive through that.
John, I spoke to a farmer who talked about some of the challenges she was having across, input costs, as well as prices, as well as tariff and trading issues, and just a variety of things that all seem to be hitting at the same time, where we have not really experienced in the farm economy all of, maybe one at a time or two at a time over the course of a decade, but it seems like all of these have kind of converged into one big moment of challenges.
Mm-hmm.
How is that in terms of priority for farmers of issue? Are inputs the number one challenge you think you're seeing in the farm economy right now, or are they alongside? Is it equal? Is it hard to swap between what's more and what's less important?
I think the biggest thing right now is if you're not constantly dialed into what's happening, like you're missing out most of the time. I mean, and I think that's why, we've always loved what we're doing with ground level dispatch, because it's quick, it's easy, it's actionable. You have to be paying attention to what's going on, because right now, every day, a tweet or something changes what the market dynamics are happening. And then you have to change what your plan is. And, if you don't have a plan, that's not a good spot to be in either. You got to have a plan in this market and really understand what your direction is, because things are changing so fast all the time. And it's one of those things that you just really got to be kind of geared into right now.
John King is with the Ground Level Dispatch. In the description to this podcast, there is a link that provides a month free trial to the folks over there at the Ground Level Dispatch. John, if folks were to click that link, give it a shot, try it out, what would they experience? What would they get out of that month?
They're going to get, a couple emails a day on actionable information. That's going to take them 2 to 3 minutes to, to digest it per email. We're going to have some stuff on the weekends occasionally, at least once or twice a month, that really gets them thinking about their operation differently and how they're going to plan for their future. So, we're always thinking about the future here, and that's what we're trying to guide our customers to do as well.
John King with the Ground Level Dispatch, thank you so much for joining us on Farm Your Daily.
Yep, thanks.
This is Farm Your Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Again, in order to continue to produce this type of local content, we would love to have you join our community. So please follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. You can also find me on social media at Geiger Reports. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and I'll be back again tomorrow, everybody.